In this video we're looking at common marking out tools that are used for setting out and marking out all of your projects. The most common ones that you obviously always need is a rule, known as a steel rule. Some people call it a ruler, but the technical term is a steel rule. You've also got a pencil. All marking out in cabinet work and timber work should be done in pencil so that you can actually remove those lines later at a later date. If you use pen or felt pen or anything like that, it's just going to soak into the timber, or even in the case of a felt tip pen, it's going to do a groove in your timber which you don't want to see. Tri-square is used for making sure that your marking out is going to be at 90 degrees to the side of your timber. Basically, whenever you're marking out, if I take this, I want to square off this end so that I can go and use it on the disc sander. So I'm just going to slide it up so I've got a little bit of space, and I'll then do a light line, and that's a line that I can sand to. One way of testing that a tri-square is actually square is to set it up and put a small line at the bottom and a small line at the top of the timber, or the top of the blade area. Flip your tri-square over, sit the pencil on the line at the bottom and slide the tri-square up to it. And if you can draw on that line and on your top line, and it's the same spot, then you know that your tri-square is square. If it's not square, you'll notice that this line here will turn out to be two lines separated a little bit. If I wanted to make sure that I had a nice hard edge, as I have in one of my other videos, I'd use a marking knife. Marking knife has a sharp blade at one end for cutting the fibres of timber. It has a point at the other end, usually for marking where nails or screws might go. But same with the pencil. Put the marking knife on the edge, slide your tri-square up to it, and then slide that back to cut your fibres. You want to make sure that your fingers are nowhere near the straight edge, so that you're going to reduce the risk of cutting your fingers. With the rules, steel rules are notorious for being damaged at the end in the workshop, so you want to make sure that you're not relying on the end of the ruler being very true. One way to avoid that is to use the opposite end if it has a 0 point starting from there. So if I wanted to mark out something that was 80 millimeters long, I've got my 0 on this mark. I then put a little mark where my 80 is. I then get my tri-square, sit my pencil on there, slide that up so it's against it, and rule a line. I know that that is now 80 millimeters. If I didn't have the markings on both sides and only had the marking on here, what you can do, I'm going to mark out something that's 60 mil long. I start with my rule on the 1 centimetre or the 10 millimetre line, and I want to go 60 millimetres. So I just need to add 60 to 10, which is 70. There's my mark. Same thing, pencil mark, slide the tri-square up, square my line, and if I did a double check with this ruler, I can see that I've got a 60 mil line there. Rulers do come in longer measurements. We've got the 600 millimetre, and we've also got the 1000 millimetre or the 1 metre rule. Some other marking tools that you can have. This one's known as a sliding bevel because it can be set to any angle and it slides in and out of its stock. The idea with this and the tri-square is that you always make sure that your stock is pushed up hard against the edge of the timber. You don't sit it like this, because that's not actually making sure that it's square. With the sliding bevel, you'd set it to an angle, slide it up, and then you would rule your line that way. You might use that if you're doing an angle that's not 45 degrees, because you can get marking squares or tri-squares that actually have a 45 degree angle on them. In our workshop, we also have what's known as a builder's roofing square. This part here is the stock. It's what goes up against the edge of the timber. Because it's so much thicker, again, you need to make sure that you do have your pencil right on the line where you want to go, slide it up and rule your line. This one does allow you to get an exact 45 degree angle marked out on your timber. It also has different markings for different roofing angles that are used. And last but not least, in this video anyway, we have the marking gauge. Marking gauge has a small pin and a body of the stock. So this part, just like the tri-square, this sits against the edge of your timber. You drag the spike along your timber and it gives you a parallel line to any edge that you're working along. The key to using this is that you rest it against your job on the timber section and tilt it until the spike grabs, and then drag it, making sure you're keeping the pressure of the stock against the edge of the timber. It can be used along the grain, it can be used across the grain, it can be used on the edges of your timber, it can be used on end grain on the timber. No matter what you do, as long as you're keeping the pressure right, you're going to get a parallel line to the edge of your timber. These are more often used for when you're setting out a chamfer on the edge of a timber, because I'd do a mark here and then I'd flick it around and I'd do a mark here. I know that those two lines are the exact same distance away from the edge of the timber. So in some of our projects we'll do that just for setting out chamfers, which is a 45-degree angle on the edge of the timber. There's another tool that's similar to this, known as a mortise gauge, which is used in one of the other videos on the mortise and tenon joint stool. But essentially, they're the basic tools that we use in the workshop for marking out our projects.